I'd like to start out by saying that this is really kind of a story about Facebook almost. One day I was going through Facebook and I saw a ad for Fiber and Flame, which was a class that was being offered for people in our area. And it had people coming over from Norway and Sweden and Denmark, and they were teaching fiber and flame, fiber arts, and blacksmithing. And I took classes in tablet weaving and nail binding. And I have to tell you, you never know when something's going to change your life. Because when I was there, somebody told me about an apprentice scholarship, and I applied for it, and I got it, amazing enough. And I applied to go for textiles to Norway. So as in my introduction, I worked with Linnea Bang and her partner, Yeppa. And I also worked with Astri Bird. So I got the apprenticeship through the Viking Connection. And the Viking Connection is sponsored by Cargill, who gave us the money. So I just have to thank Cargill for giving us the scholarships and grants. If you want to know anything more about the Viking Connection, they are on Facebook. So just look them up. In my picture here, you're going to see some former winners. The first one is Doug Swenson. He used to be a teacher at the Vesterheim before he passed. He got was a great instructor in blacksmithing. Then it's me. Next to me is Heidi Sherman. Heidi is got hers for working with flax and weaving. And then to her right in the yellow is Renee, and she went for pottery. And way to the right is Tim, and he's our leader. He's the one who administers the grants and is in charge of the Viking Connection. So moving on to the next slide. When we got to Norway, and I say we because I got to bring Melba with me, and Melba is very active in the Vesterheim. I'm sure many of you know her. But when we got there, Astri picked us up. And on the first day, we went around to museums. Excuse me. On the first day, we went around to museums. The first museum we went into was the Viking planet. And as you can see in this picture, she's on the wall. So I knew this was going to be a big trip when I got there, because the person I'm studying with is the person you're studying museums. It was amazing. I asked Astri before I got there for some homework so I could be prepared. There was nothing that prepared me for this. So we also went to the Viking Museum. You can go to the next slide. So with Astri, she is a very bling person. So she has all of the jewelry, all of the bling. She's just, I spent the whole time like with my jaw open. She's so cool. She's also really into experimental archaeology. And let me explain that a little bit. Experimental archaeology, like she's very into the Oseberg find, which we'll talk about later. But there's a piece in that find that was originally labeled as a spoon. And it's not a spoon. So later it was just labeled as an unknown piece. Well, she takes that piece and tries to figure out what it was really used for. So that's experimental archaeology. And Astri is just really into precision. So when we were doing anything that she does is museum quality, and the pieces that I made with her are museum quality. So next slide. And then there's Life Linnea. Linnea was my other instructor, and she's very much into day-to-day life in the Viking world. So we did dyeing of materials, which is what you see in this picture. We dyed with a copper pot. The framework is actually a framework from an archaeological find. She's also into food. We did bead making. We did stitching. We did shoes while I was with her. We studied the Bayou tapestry. We did a lot of things with Linnea, but it was everyday life, not as much bling. So, next. My birthday was while I was in Norway studying. And from Linnea and Jeppe, this was my birthday present. It is a flint steel. And they told me before we could get started, I had to start my own fire with this. So that'll tell you how we really got down to day-to-day life with them. And it took me a while, but I did get that fire going and did it with the flint and steel. It was great. Okay, next slide. So that's Linnea and I. There was still snow on the ground. We did our dyeing outside. Behind us, you can see the smithy. The red building in the background is the smithy. Her and Jeppe live at a folk school, and they teach Viking life at the folk school. So on the right, you can see me. I'm holding leg wraps, and the leg wraps were dyed in the same pot as the piece that she's holding. The leg wraps were white wool, and what she's holding was gray wool. And we dyed it with birch leaves. The birch leaves turned the gray wool into a green, army green kind of color. And the white turned into a bright, beautiful yellow color. So that's just one of the things I did with Linnea while I was there. Okay, so that leads to how we get going on our garments in the next slide. So we went back through all of this, we studied some archaeology and textile finds. And I just want to say that not all textiles were kept when archaeology kind of first started finding things in the Viking times. So things that were kept were really the shiny things, and that's what survived. So there's not a lot of textiles to study. But there's also the newer archaeology has found the worth of the textiles. So there's more newer things. So in this picture, you can see the Labrine mitten. And that was there's a pass in Norway, and a glacier is melting back from the pass. And as the glacier is melting, they're finding things in the ice melt. And this blue mitten is one of the things that they've found. Oops. So that pass was kind of a travel highway, and they found a lot of discarded items. And if you follow a Facebook page called Secrets of the Ice, they will follow every year in about August, September. They go up onto that ice field and try and find new things. And this year they found some skis. They found another piece of textile. Really exciting Facebook page. And that's where I got this picture from, is the Secrets of the Ice Facebook page. So other places that archaeological textiles are found are from also from grave finds or from land finds. There's places like Björka, Sweden, which they're doing some maritime archaeology. And so they're trying to excavate part of the town. And the civilization of Björka, part of it is underwater right now, and part of it's on land. So they're kind of going through and doing both the land and the water part. Over time, people left Björka and moved, so the whole town is pretty much preserved. The interesting thing I just learned about part of the Björka find is they were finding all these small pieces and they were throwing them away. Well, somebody started collecting them and they found out they were gaming pieces. So even now, things are being found and we're figuring out what they are. It's just very interesting, I think. Another place is Ribe, Denmark. And also, they've just excavated like 10% of that town. but they found huge amounts of beads, and we're going to study those beads a little bit later. So the lack of finds for textiles really leads people to be able to interpret and figure out the way they want to see the textiles or how they think they were formed. So just as a little side note, 45% of the maritime finds in Birka are not identified objects. So there's lots of experimental archaeology out there available for people to do. So next slide. These are oval brooches, and the oval brooches create a lack of oxygen, or created something under the brooches to be able to preserve a little bit of textiles. So you can see inside these brooches, there's a little bit of textile around where the pins would have been, which allow us to find out what kind of material they would have worn. You can see on the one on the right, there's a loop. So we know that there were loops attached to the brooches, which gives us a good direction on how things were constructed. Notice that you can kind of see that this is a woven piece. So we knew this was woven. From this tiny bit, there was a little bit of wool in here. There's some linen in here. You can tell a little bit about the construction and the color and the dye that they used and what type of weaving they did. So a lot can be told just by a little bit found inside the brooches. Okay, next. This is a drawing of a grave. Notice the brooch placement on this. So the brooches are up higher. They're a little bit to the side, so they fell over. There's some pieces attached to them. So we know that there was some kind of straps here. Also, I want you to notice there's a snips a little further down the body, which would have been like an iron scissors. Yeah. Remember, a lot of the Vikings cremated their dead, but there are a few graves. So that's why it's so important to have these grave finds and these illustrations from way back. The next slide is another illustration. And I think many of you will probably recognize this one because it's pretty famous. This was originally thought to be a man because of the grave finds with it. There's a sword, there's an axe that you can see. There's horses buried with this person. The assumption was it was male, and very recently they found out through DNA studies that this is actually a female. But in this grave, the person had been sitting up and they fell over. There's a lot you can tell from the drawings from way back in the 1800s about how people dressed, how they were perceived, and what happened to them. Okay, next. This is the Osberg find. So this is the Osberg tapestry. This is actually a watercolor that was done. The actual tapestry is in a kind of a ball, and it's brown. So this is an artistic rendering of what the tapestry would have looked like. But if you look kind of in the middle of this, you see there's a lady with a dress, and she looks to have a shawl on. The shawl has diamonds in it. So you can kind of tell what the material is. The underdress went all the way to the floor. She had something covering her head. So from the art of the time, you can really tell a lot. There's some baggy pants on the men here. And that's really where a lot of our interpretation can come from, is also from the art of the time, not just from the textile finds. So yeah, look, there's several head coverings. Okay, so these are silver figurines that were also, these were found mostly in Birka. But you can tell a lot from these figurines as well. They're just small metal figurines. There were several of these found. And I want you to notice on some of them, like in the bottom middle, you can see she's got brooches that look like it's up close to her face or up on her shoulders. In the bottom left, you can see her dress goes all the way to the ground. But the one next to it on the right, her ankles kind of show. So this kind of gives us an idea of, you can see in the next row up, that lady's got several layers of clothing on. So we knew there were several layers from the clothing. And then once again, just like things today, you did art of the most beautiful people and the most beautiful things. You were buried in your best wear now, just like they were then. So we're obviously looking at the best wear, the nicest wear that they had. But that's what we base our interpretations off of. Next. So this is how you take a piece of art and turn it into the clothing. So on the bottom right, you can see there's a little figurine. And the figurine has her hair up in some kind of a bun or a figure. Again, you have that diamond twill on the figurine. You can kind of see that there's an angle or a slope. So that's probably a shawl, and there's something beneath it. So in this interpretation, you can see there's the shawl, the head wrap, and that's again leading to how we interpret and make our clothing. So by the stripes in the material or the diamonds in the material from the artwork, they probably had different materials that they would have made the clothing out of. And that's, the diamond weave or just a straight weave across. Okay, next. So these are colors that would have been used during the Viking times. I took this picture in Norway, and it's either Linnea or Astri's colors, and I don't remember which, and I apologize if they're on here. But you can see the blues, probably out of woad. You can see greens, and yellows, which we did with the birch, or you can do with walnut. There's reds that would have been with madder. They also did things with iron pots or copper pots, similar to what we did now. They had purples that would have been based on lichen. So there were lots of colors. Unlike what we see on TV, where things are very drab, they had lots of color. Vikings loved color. Okay, next. This is diamond twill. So I talked earlier about diamond twill and how we could see it in the art of both the watercolor piece and of the some of the statues. So you can see in this picture the diamond pattern that seemed to be pretty popular during the time. I just wanted to show they did regular weaving, they did twills, and they did this diamond are popular. I also want to say, when you're buying online, let's keep this slide here. When you're buying online, make sure you know who you're buying from, because there's more reputable sellers, and you can get some really nice pieces of this diamond twill out there. So just make sure you're buying wool if you're making your own. Okay, moving on. This is just a picture of sewing some linen. So linen is typically just woven. Linen was always natural. Linen does not take dye very well. So when you see things, it's always usually just unnatural. And then next, silk. So I have this piece of silk. It's gorgeous. It's from Asper. The Asperg Fine. The Asperg Fine is from Norway. So these are actually fairly large birds in this silk. And they would have been a piece that would have been traded. Originally, they would have been made in somewhere in the Asian countries, probably in the China area, which is actually where this one came from. So next. So this is a piece from the Osberg finds. And I just wanted to put it in there because you can see the weave. So you can see it's a woven piece. It's kept under glass. You can see kind of it goes over to and under, over to and under. I just thought it was an interesting piece. It's a picture I took while I was in the Viking Museum, the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo. Okay. So then we're going to start with little men's jewelry. This is a hook from Birka, and this keeps your leg wraps on. So the art was really interesting, I think, during the time, and we'll see how the art changes a little bit. But you can definitely see the eyes, the nose, and then underneath is where it hooks your piece on, and you can see up in the hair where you can sew it. So on the next page, the next slide, you can see like the number 6 is where those hooks were found. So it's fairly close to the knee. You can see the outline of that exact piece. And so we knew that's where that piece was supposed to be. So in the next slide, that's how it's sewn on. This is actually my leg wrap. My leg wrap is a different piece of art. You can see it looks more like a bird. He's got the eyes and the beak wraps around a hook on, and the wings. So mine underneath has how you sew it on to your leg wrap. And they say you get extra credit for lining up your leg wraps. So next, the next slide, you can see Mike is wearing the leg wraps that I made for him. And a leg wrap is used for protection against the brush. It's used for warmth in the wintertime. And it's used for compression and support during work and fighting. So leg wraps were fairly common. And you could also tuck them if you don't have the hooks. But I think the hooks are pretty cool. And it's the men's kind of jewelry. So, okay, next. The leg wraps, this is just a picture of how to do it. You start at the top, go to the bottom, bring it back up. I think you can really do it any way you want, but that gives you an idea. It's just a thin strip, about 4 inches, that wraps down and up your leg. Okay. This is a mitten that was found in Iceland. The mitten was from about, as you can see, about 874 to 930. The original mitten was found in a foundation, and it was ripped along the top. This picture is from the Iceland National Museum. That's where I took it from. But notice that this mitten is woven. And then you can see a separate piece is used for the thumb. And then another whole separate piece around the hand. And like I said, the bottom was ripped. So this is a really interesting mitten because of the inside. But before we go on, notice that you can see the weaving in this piece. So as we go on, the next slide will show you how to reconstruct it. There we go. So this is my reconstruction of that. On the inside of that mitten are loops, and the loops are sewn into the fabric. So I obviously used a knitting needle. They would have probably used a stick, is my best guess. but there's loops on the inside, and you catch just one thread. By catching one thread, you don't see it on the outside. It's a fairly thick wool. I did use wool from Iceland. They would have cut the loops. I got to tell you, I'm scared to do that. But they would have cut the loops. And if you think about it, they probably wouldn't have washed that wool very much. So the lanolin would have made that a waterproof, warm mitten. It was brilliant. It was just brilliant. So on to the next piece. This is the Viborg shirt. And this is my interpretation of the Viborg shirt. Shirt is a shirt that was found in Denmark. It's the best preserved men's shirt that has been found to date. It was found in a post hole. And just a reminder that post holes in our modern times are not the same as then. Back then, to build the longhouses, they were built with posts. So it was found in a post hole of a house. Back then, they would offer offerings to the gods, and they think maybe this shirt was put in as an offering to the gods. The original was much smaller. Mine, you can see in the back, is made for an adult male. It's made for Mike. The original was probably made for a child, and it had 8 different kinds of stitches. This was a fancy shirt. So please note that the original was natural linen. This one is also, the one I did is natural linen. There's a center square in this shirt. So there's a center square in the front, which attaches it to a liner. And there's also a center square in the back. And I want you to note that this center square and the lines are on the top. It's a fold in the material, and then it's sewed down to attach it to the liner. So this was really a way of making it warm. By the placement of the square in the back up higher, you can work in that shirt, and down lower in the front. So it would have flowed really well. It would have moved with the person. It had an upper liner to it. Again, just brilliant seamstress work. And as you can see, there were ties. So we'll move on to the next slide. And this is a drawing of the original find of the shirt. So this is what was left of the find. And I just want you to note there's an upper section and a lower section. And you can definitely see the line about where the waist would be. The lower section did not have a lining. The upper section was lined. And the arms, if you look way to the right, you can see where the arms scooped a little. So the arms were really made to fit the person. And if you look at the underarms, there are little gussets under the arms to make everything fit. So it fit just perfectly. Lots of shaping in this piece, even though it's a men's piece, probably. I'm sure that at some point it was just a replica. It wasn't only just thrown in a hole. It must have been used. Not this shirt, but another one. So the next slide, this is the patterning that we get for the shirt. You can see that there was a piece that came around at the waist to the front. It gave you movement, but you also had protection of your legs in the front. And there again, you can see where the sleeve had that angle going up. So you had a little tighter cuff, more movement in here through the elbow. And it opened up, so you could open it up or cinch the ties. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant seamstress work. Okay, next, baggy pants. There is not a lot of finds for men's trousers, and there are no finds for baggy pants, but there's a lot of art. So on the right, you can see a piece of artwork. where you see the baggy pants, and we talked about it in the Asperg tapestry. So this figurine is actually from Sweden. And a lot of people do wear these trousers. The question is, were these baggy trousers, were they tucked in? Were they sewn baggy? We really don't know. So it's left up to people's interpretation. They were probably a fashion of the time that maybe came from the Middle East. And the fabric, who knows, could have come from abroad. So as we know, Vikings traveled a lot, and I think they took fashion with them. And this may be one of the pieces that we see that. Okay. So this is a drawing of the Thorsberg trousers. These came from a bog in northern Germany. The feet were attached to these, and the feet pointed straight out at the sides. The original was very fragmented, as you can kind of see in the middle. And this textile is actually older than Viking Age. It's from about 100 to 300 AD, or the Iron Age, and they were found in 1860. You can see they had very narrow legs, and there's a gusset on the inner leg. The entire piece is 5 parts. 2 of the parts are for the legs, 2 for the feet, which again stick straight out, and then the quad piece in between. Person that this came off of had really skinny legs, and the quad piece did not attach at the knees. So they don't know if that was really for riding, if it maybe came apart. They don't really know. But they're really interesting trousers, and that's kind of what I based my trousers for Mike on, are these Thorsberg trousers. And just as an interesting note, the body in the bog where these were found was a sacrifice body, and there were several things inside the grave with him. And the pictures were from 1976. Okay, let's move on to headwear. Everybody's favorite headwear. I think you could do a whole lecture on helmets. This is the helmet that we have for Mike. This helmet, like some of the finds, was not one piece. It was several pieces. And I don't want to talk a lot about helmets, but I do want to say they, make sure they have nose pieces. And if you're buying a helmet for your kit, make sure you have a reputable buyer. Okay, moving on to the pillbox hat. So this hat for me right now is really exciting. There were two hats, one found in Headgear, Germany, and the other found in Leens, Netherlands. So as you can see with this hat, it's 2 different pieces. One's around the crown, and it's kind of arched with one seam across the middle. And the other one is just one piece around the crown with a seam on the back. Both of the hats that were found are from the 10th century. The reason I say this hat is exciting is in the 3 weeks since I've put this program together, a guy named Charlie Bruns put out a study he did on this hat. And he went back to the original description find by Inga Haig. And in her description, there were loops sewn into the hat, and the loops would have been on the inside. So if you remember our mitten from Iceland, it would have been exactly opposite. So our mitten had the loops on the inside. This hat, I'm sorry, I said it wrong before. This hat would have had the loops on the outside. So they would have cut the loops on the outside, and it would have looked like fake fur. So this is really interesting, and I can't wait to study this a little more. Like I said, this came out since I've even put the program together. So it's really exciting. her other finds in Birka that also have that looped sewn into them. And I just want to note that these are sewn in, not woven in. So a lot of you, I think, know Melba, who does a lot of weaving at Vesterheim. And she does a weaving with locks. So you see the lock coming out of the weaving, and it's used for capes. This would have been sewn in instead of woven in. So like this hat and the mitten are sewn in and not woven like Melba does, which are both accurate. Okay, next. This is Max. Max Goldberg. I took this picture from his Instagram page, and I want you to note his hat. His hat is like a cone, and to the right is a piece from the museum in Iceland of Thor. And Max is, I think, the only person I know who is courageous enough to wear that hat, and he looks awesome in it. But so that cone hat is found in a lot of art pieces. I think maybe it was from gaming pieces. And if you do follow Max on Instagram, he is somebody that is really knowledgeable. I look up to him a lot, and he knows a lot about clothing. So he's somebody I really recommend. He also helped me procure some of my pieces. So somebody I trust. Anyway, next. So this is a hood that was found, and I'm going to butcher the name of this hood, but the Skodheim hood. This is another bog find. It was found, they believe it's from 995. It was found in Norway by a farmer. So this, again, this find was found with a body. The body was wrapped in wool. It was secured with leather straps and woven ribbon. And it was laid on a reindeer hide. And then that was laid on top of birch branches. Anyway, the body was fully dressed, and it was wearing this hood. The hood was not attached to the cape below it or the tunic below it. But I want you to notice this hood has ties, and the ties could have been tied in the back for better vision. And it also can be tied in the front to keep away the elements. Again, brilliant. So I just want to point out the placement of the ties. In the next picture, there's another reproduction of the hood.
Steph, can we go back one slide? There was just a quick picture, quick question. If we could get Max's full name, it's Max Gullberg, Gulberg.
Two L's, Gullberg.
Thank you. Good. I know that we could talk about all of these forever and ever, and I really want us to, but I know you also wanted to save a few minutes for questions at the end. So,
I do. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next slide then. Turn shoes. So, these are the shoes that I made for Mike and I. These shoes are made of leather, of course. And let me tell you about why Viking shoes are called turn shoes. They're made inside out. You get them wet and you turn them right side out. So you turn them. So in the next picture, there's a picture of Asperg shoes. I took this picture at, again, the Viking Museum, the Viking Ship Museum. So the Asperg ship had 2 women that were buried. And interesting little fact, they found the shoes from both women. And in the US, one woman would have been a size 7.5, and the other woman would have been a size 9, which I thought was really interesting. Something I thought amazing when I looked at these shoes in person was they're so thin. They're just amazingly thin shoes. And you can see there's laces. So the lace kind of ties around and helps keep the shoe on, or the boot. Each of these laces were about 1 meter long. So different shoes. This shoe, you can see there's a seam in the shoe that's furthest to the right. So this one was made of several pieces. One of the other pairs of shoes that were found on the ship was one piece of leather was turned into shoes. Okay, next. Oh, we're just getting to the jewelry. P51s. So women's brooches, they started appearing about in the 700s, fell out of popularity in the 10th century, but it's what everybody loves to see. They're called turtle brooches because, as you can imagine, they look like turtle shells. They started out as small, thin ovals, and as time progressed, they got fancier and fancier and fancier. Okay. So, in 1985, there were 3,600 brooches found. There's many, many more now, and I don't know the exact number. The P51s, which you see here, were mass produced. And yes, they did mass produce them. They were made in a mold and poured. So they could mass produce these. And this is one of the most common ones, the P51s. And that set you're looking at is mine. And you can see them on my kit behind me. Okay, next. So the brooches, this is a grave find, and you can see how they were found actually in a grave and the size. And so they were worn by women. And if you want to study more about the brooches, there was a classification by a guy with the last name Peterson, and he did classifications in 1928 of all of the brooches that had been found to that date. And that's why it all starts with a P. So P51s or P whatever number. And by the number like 51s were a later time frame. So that's why the 51. Now, some graves do not have matching brooches. Some graves had 3 brooches. So they believe that sometimes they were passed down from mother to daughter. Sometimes if you didn't have a lot of money, maybe they really don't know. Maybe you had 2 separate ones. And as you can see behind me, and maybe you can't, sometimes you had a 3rd brooch up on your neck to hold another piece together. Okay. So these are my P27s. They're earlier. You can see they're a little less intricate or less ornate, but still you can see like hands holding things in these. They're still beautiful and ornate. And when I told you guys that Max helped me procure a few things, he helped me get these brooches, which were actually made in Russia. So unfortunately, couldn't get them now, but they're beautiful pieces of artwork. Next. Oh, so my friend, I told you my friend Astri was bling. This is some of her bling. And so this is a few of her brooches with the beads attached. And you can see also in there's a long skinny one. And that's a mirror brooch, another kind of brooch that would hold your cape together. Okay, next. Just a little close-up of some of her bling. Not all of the beads were glass. You can see some wire wrapped that she has. Next. Yeah, this is another set of hers. So, they're beautiful, and you can just see how the art kind of changes. These would have been an earlier piece, and the art kind of changes as the Viking time progresses. It's a really interesting to study these brooches and how the art of the time progressed. It's amazing, the scroll work, and then even to study, sometimes you can find mistakes they made. And then when we're replicating now, do we put in their mistake? Or was it a mistake? So, next. Another one of Astri. So later on, they had gilding at the end of the Viking period. They had gilding, so you can see the 2 different colors being used. Next. And then at the end of the Viking period, they also had filigree. And this is the brooch that I have on my that holds my my underdress together. So you can see it holds the linen, the keyhole and the linen together on my piece. So a lot of filigree. Okay, next. They also had trefoil or brooches, and those would have been in the same place in the upper neck area. This one happens to be from about 900. Okay. Beads. The beads, when I first saw them, I kept thinking they look so modern. So this set of beads I bought from a friend of mine who is from Ribe, Denmark, and he does replicas of beads that were found in Ribe, in that town. So Ribe is a trading town. So the ships would stop there and they do a lot of trading. The beads from here, the earlier beads, are actually from Roman mosaics. So they pillaged Roman mosaics or traded for them. And they would take the glass pieces out of the mosaics, melt them down, and make the beautiful beads. Later glass found in Ribe was from the Middle East. And you could tell the difference in that glass. It was a little more cloudy. Some of the white in the glass, I thought it was really interesting to find out that they would burn animal bones and the white ash would be added to clear glass, and that would give you the white, beautiful white color. So the beads were used for trading. This is a picture of a lot of the beads found in Ribe. You can see the different colors, the different sizes. They're used for trading. Next. Just real quick, Norwegian money still has holes in it, still used for trading. Okay, next. So your brooches had to carry things. You didn't have pockets. You had to carry stuff. So this is just some examples of keys, and you would have carried your keys on a string off your brooches. Next. Needle cases. This is a needle case from Sweden. And you would have had a piece of wool stuffed inside that case to carry your needles. Next. That's my needle case. You can kind of see the piece of wool sticking out. I have a filigree one that's based on a piece from Birka, Sweden. And then in the next one, I think is also one of my pieces. That's an ear spoon or an ear scoop. Very common in the Viking era. They cleaned their ears. They were very cleanly people, and that was considered serious hygiene to keep your ears clean. So in the next slide, you'll see another example of an ear spoon. There's a replica on the left and the original on the right, but ear scoops. Okay. Oh, yeah, don't skip that piece. Even the dogs had jewelry. So when I was at the museum I told you about in Oslo at the Viking Museum, this is a dog collar that was found. So even the dogs had jewelry. I thought it was so cool. Okay. So this is my interpretation. My dress is held up by fabric loops. I use the same wool. My dress is madder dyed. Yeah. So the outside layer, the apron dress, is called the Smokkr, and it's held up with the fabric loops. And that's where the brooches come in. The brooches held up your dress. That was their purpose. Okay. And then that is my underdress, or my underdress. So this one is also made of wool. We can keep moving on. This one's just a wool muslin, which is what they would have been made it on. This is Linnea. This is in her underdress. Hers is made of linen, not dyed. And Linnea described these as something you would have worn all the time. It was the underwear of the day. You never would have gone out without it. So the underdress or the cirque. All right, next. Women's hoods or women's coverings. This is a hood found in York, England, in a Viking settlement. This is a silk hood, obviously worn by a woman. And there are 3 of these found. All 3 were made of silk. Okay, next. And then there's linen. You find a lot of linen hand wraps, just wrapped around into that, making a knot out of your hair. Okay. When I asked the Vesterheim if there were any Viking Age pieces in their collection, they told me about this piece, which is beautiful. And I'll let you guys talk about it.
Sure, this is Vesterheim's only authentic Viking era artifact, and we probably wouldn't have one, except this was a gift to our museum in 1939 from the Archaeological Museum at the University of Oslo. It's about 35.5 inches in length and 5.5 inches in width. It was found in a burned grave in Gudbrandsdal in eastern Norway. Kelly Wyenzek from Winnipeg, a Viking researcher, has studied the sword and said that it was because of the small handle meant for either a smaller man or perhaps a woman to carry. The breaks in the edge suggest it was used in combat. And unlike most other Viking swords with 2 straight edges, this one has 1 curved edge and 1 straight edge. So perhaps it was customized or modified at some point and made by someone who knew how to make swords. The date is approximately 900.
Well, Steph, this has been just absolutely fascinating. There's so much information. I feel like we could have.
I could talk forever about this.
Exactly. We could talk for another hour about any one of these categories. We do have a handful of questions that have come in. One came in from Sue, who is asking, what's on the back of the brooches? How do they attach them to the clothing?
There is a pin on the back. Can I take a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I don't know if you can see this, but there is a pin in the back of the brooches. Makes them attached. Yeah.
Excellent.
Amazing.
So that's how it looks. There we go.
Perfect. Thank you.
And while you've got your examples behind you, we also have a question about the Viborg shirt. You'd mentioned it was lined. What is it lined with?
But it is lined with another piece of exactly the same linen. So it's 2 pieces of linen back to back.
Thank you.
Excellent. How long were you in Norway for your apprenticeship?
Oh, this might be a sad story. I wasn't going to go there, but I went over to Norway, and it was supposed to be for a couple weeks, and I went March of 2020.
Oh.
So yeah. So we got there. I think on Friday or Saturday, and we studied with Astri and Linnea. And on Wednesday, the president said we had to be home by Friday. So it was a nightmare. We don't want to go there. But thanks to the power of Zoom, I finished via Zoom. So where there's a will, there's a way. We still did it. But
amazing.
I was not there long enough. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, you have to go back and more time, right?
I did. Yes.
All right.
Could you tell us about the sewing needles?
Yes. So the sewing needles is something that you never think about, is how they would have sewed such fine things. But they used bone needles, and the blacksmiths of the day did draw out needles and punch a hole in them and they were also cast out of out of bronze. So they'd pour bronze needles, bone needles, and iron needles.
Wow. For the women's underdress, would they wear anything beneath that, or was it just was that the underwear? Rebecca's wondering about the wool being on the bare skin.
Good question. So the apron dress, generally wool, and then there's a muslin layer that you can wear, a wool muslin layer that you can wear. Under that, a linen layer. So the the under dress is linen, much softer than the wool. I kind of skipped through that quick because I was talking so much. So sorry about that.
Absolutely. It's all good. There's a lot to share. Lorraine, I think we have time for one more question.
Oh, wonderful. Well, you gave us a look at the brooch, but how heavy is that? Does it pull on the dress?
Yes. Yes. By the end of the day, this does get heavy. So wearing 2 of these, you kind of wear it where it scoops, your shoulder kind of scoops a little. And that's where they wear them up a little higher. They do get a little heavy, but I mean, it's beautiful jewelry. It's what we do, right?
Exactly. Gorgeous.
Well, thank you, Steph. This has been just absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Steph, you are wonderful. We are grateful. Thank you. And thanks to you, Lorraine, for being here. We hope you will all join us again soon.